Hey everybody, and welcome to the second recording of my Django Bootcamp live session. So we just finished our live session about 10 minutes ago in our private Discord server, and I wanted to make a couple announcements before we play out the rest of the recording. So the first thing is, if you want to be part of the next session, this is for paid members of that course. So if you buy the course, whether that's on Udemy or my personal platform, you can have access to our Discord server where you have other students in there taking the course. You have teachers, assistants who help you along the way to make sure you can finish the course. And we also have live sessions like this where we do Q&As. I also code out in front of you, make sure that all questions are answered and everybody enjoys the course. Now, if you are somebody that did buy the course and for some reason you didn't get the invite, we have an issue with Udemy right now where Udemy doesn't like me privately messaging students links like this. They try to kind of hold access to their students. So if you didn't get that, let me know, send me an email and I'll make sure you get that link. It's just an issue with Udemy and I'll make sure you get access after we confirm that you're obviously a paid member. So with that being said, we had a couple announcements here. So let's go ahead and play out the rest of the recording. Here, let me zoom out my camera here. So I'll just get started in a minute. Just want to zoom out so it kind of looks normal. I'm like zoomed in at 175%. So I guess welcome everybody to the second session here of the bootcamp session. We, I guess, haven't officially given it a name, but in this one, what we're going to do here is we're still working out the formatting and how we're actually going to handle these live sessions. But for now, what I want to do here is start with like a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. I just want to see where everyone's at in the course. If you're stuck anywhere, just let us know. We could go into like a Q&A with that, answer some questions. That's kind of the idea, is to ensure that everyone can go through this. We're going to try to keep the questions to the course or general Django questions. So we want to spend some time here, do a quick introduction, I guess, with the audience, and then we're going to go back into a live coding session. So this is recorded. This will be posted on YouTube after you guys in this session here get premium services because you have bought the course. So any questions that you have later on can be posted in the Discord server in the general chat or questions during the live stream. You could go to the questions channel and ask questions there. So if your mic is muted while I'm talking, obviously when I'm in the middle of the recording session, we don't want to have interruptions. So everyone will be muted, ask the questions there, and we'll just go back and forth. Abhi and Praveen are the moderators here. So they are the teacher's assistants. They'll be helping out. They'll go back and forth with you all. And yeah, we're just going to keep it that way. So right now, if you have a question, go into this questions text channel, ask the question here, and or just say, hey, I have something to ask. You could ask it in text, or you could just actually speak up in this session. So just ask for it, and then your mic will be unmuted. So for now, I'm going to pull up the course here. So close this out here. So we are going to be working in the second half of this after the Q&A. We are going to be working on building out the database. So I'll go through the admin panel. We'll set that up. We'll migrate our database. We'll talk about relationships, database relationships, and then we'll do some queries here and render some data out. In the last session, we just finished up this right here. So this is all we have at this point. Here, let me mute somebody's mic. Or if you guys can take care of that. Yeah, cool. So at this point, this is all we have. We started the last session with building out our project. In these sessions, all we're doing is basically redoing what we're doing in the course, but we want to have student input at this point. So any questions that you have, when I'm building out the course, I have no way of getting live feedback. So that's kind of the intention here, is to get that response from you and answer questions as we go along with it. Maybe I missed something or didn't explain something as well. So this is your chance to ask them directly. So at this point, we have some static data. We have a project right here, or we have links to projects. It looks like I turned off my server. 1 second here. So I'm going to get my environment set up here. Just want to do a quick recap. And I am doing a live server, not live server, but the live share. So you're going to see Praveen and Abhi also have access to my VS Code here. So they're going to be able to jump in and assist whenever I need it. So yeah, right now that's all we have. We have some projects. This is all just some Python lists of dictionaries here. It's all static data, but we're going to continue and start building out the database. So that's what we're going to do in this section, is go through building the database chapter, and we're going to work on this in this session. So any questions Praveen, Abi, do you see anything in the questions text channel? If you're stuck anywhere in the course or you have questions on anything specific that we did, go ahead and ask those too. And if you guys had any input too, go ahead and jump in, Praveen and Abi. So can anybody unmute their mic on their own right now at this point?
No, not really. It looks like everyone's muted manually, but
No, the red microphones are muted manually from my side or the mode side.
I see.
And
Okay.
all of the gray, they are muted by self.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll just let the questions come in if anyone has any. If we don't have any questions, I'll assume everyone's doing just fine through the course. I would love to hear where everyone's at, but just a little update. At this point, I am putting up the API videos. So I launched the course without setting this up yet. So if we look at the API section, these are all just text, and you're just going to see this alert that says I'm currently working on this video. So at this point, it's actually locked because I'm viewing this as a student. So I'm putting this up right now, and I'm going to do something a little bit different with the API. So we're going to build out an API using the Django REST framework, but instead of just building out an API and just using something like Postman where we're calling some routes here and just making some requests, I'm actually going to build out a front end. And I was trying to figure out if I should do this with React or just some simple JavaScript or Vue. And I just decided to call this data using just JavaScript. So we're going to build out like an entirely different template. So it's going to be separate from the project, and it's going to replicate how an API can actually interact with what we built. So instead of just having an API, we're actually going to make some calls and build out a front end. So, okay, so that was actually a question. There we go. I didn't realize that. So yeah, I'm putting that up right now. I'm filming it. I have 3 videos complete, and it's going to be like a 10-part video or series, or at least mini series within the course here. And those next ones should be going pretty quick. So I'm cranking those out as fast as possible. So yeah, those should be up and running pretty soon. Also, if you originally registered with this link here, I made a few updates here, and I'll actually update the course with this. But if you registered, you might have had your account lost because we were using an SQLite database earlier on. And now we actually configured a Postgres database. We are using Linode for static file hosting. So all your images and your data should be uploaded, and it should stay. So if you have an account here, you may have noticed this alert section. So in this inbox, you're actually going to get an alert anytime somebody messages you. If somebody reviews your work, you'll actually get an alert and an email and a notification. So if anybody wants to go to this link here, I'll throw this in and send me a quick message. Just say a quick hello. If you don't have an account, just quickly register because this is what we're building. You probably lost it from before if you already had one. And we'll just see an alert pop up here. And it's not live at this point, or not live, but it's not going to be like an instant update. We're not having channels or WebSockets connected yet, so I'm going to have to refresh to actually see this. But if somebody wants to, go ahead and do that, and we'll be able to see that. So I just integrated that, and I will get an email that says something like, hey, whoever messages me, the person's name, and then it'll just say this person sent you a message, go check it out. And that's going to come in my email. So that's a quick or a cool little feature that I added here that will be in the course. There we go. So we see this. Somebody sent me a message here. I can open that. That's an unread message. And we just see hello, and that's it. So once I open that, that goes away. So I'm using middleware here. So basically how we built this in is I just wrote some middleware that's going to query the database on each route request. So every time I go to a page, we're just sending a request and we're checking if we have a new message in our inbox. So yeah, that's going to be a fun little feature that we'll add almost like a bonus feature in the course. So let's see, any questions here with Vue would be great. See, that's the problem is if I use a front-end framework, a lot of people are so new to the idea of all that I can actually end up alienating half the audience. So I figured if I just use some JavaScript, everyone should be able to use it as long as you know JavaScript. And that's kind of what you'll need to work with an API anyways. So yeah, that's why I decided not to use a front-end framework. So just some simple JavaScript. Okay, so let's see. We have people in the chat. Nobody At this point, it seems like they have a question, or at this point, I'm not seeing any. So let's go ahead and just start with this session here. We'll start with the live coding. So we are going to start with, let's see, which video was that? So in the building the database, we're going to start with models and the admin panel. So at this point in our application, let me just move the chat here. I guess I can leave it here. And I'm going to zoom into my screen here, make sure everyone can see everything good. Okay, so it's going to look a little messed up, but that's okay at this point. So in the last video, we set up our templates here. So we have some simple templates. We're rendering some data. We have our single project. And if you have your server on, if you're up until this point or you follow it along here, if I restart the server, we're going to see this error and it just says unapplied migration. So this is where we left off in the last session. So at this point, here, let me move the chat so I can actually see it as I'm streaming if any questions come in. So at this point, we don't have a database set up. Django by default does give us a database to work with. So we're going to use an SQLite database. And this isn't something that you would normally want to use in production. This is good for testing, but it's not really meant for production here. So for the long term here, you should use something like MySQL, Postgres. If you want to use a NoSQL database, you could in theory use something like MongoDB even. But we're going to use Postgres long term, but for now we are going to use SQLite. So what this error is telling us at this point is that we have all these apps inside of our project here. So if we look at installed apps here, we have all these apps and we also have the project app that we built out. And basically all these apps have some kind of database tables. If we look at the admin section here, we have tables for the admin panel that's going to handle things like users. We have sessions, and basically what's happening here is these apps have migrations that are prepped that need to be added to the database, and they have not been migrated yet. So the tables are not actually there. The SQLite database is empty, and we just need to go ahead and run those migrations so those tables get built out. So that's what we're going to do right now. Is the first thing is we just want to go ahead and apply those migrations. So if I just open up a new terminal here, actually here, I'll just turn off my server. We'll just do Control C. And to actually apply these migrations, I just need to run Python manage.py migrate. So that's going to be the first migrations. It's going to take all these migrations, which are basically like pre-configured SQL commands, and it's going to execute them so these tables actually get built out. So if I hit migrate, we're going to see these migrations being applied. So what just happened here is these database tables got built out in this SQLite database. Now we can't see it. There's no interface at this point to actually view it. When we have our Postgres database, we'll use something called pgadmin. So we'll actually be able to view the tables, but with SQLite, there is like an extension where we can view it, but we can't do that at this point, and we're not going to use the extension. So to actually view the data, what I'm going to do here is create a super user. So I'm going to actually make an entry into the database, and we can create a user because that's a table that was by default added into the database when we ran that migration. So to create a super user, and this is basically a user with all levels of permission, this is like an admin in the database, we can just run Python manage.py create super user, and I'll just hit enter. And what's going to happen here is it's going to start prompting me for some information. So if I leave it blank, it's going to take the username from my computer, which is Dennis Ivy. In this case, I'm just going to type it out here. So I'm just going to enter my username. Then I'm going to be prompted for my email. So I'll just do Dennis Ivy, and then we'll just do @email.com. So we'll just use a fake account here. And if you have questions, again, this is an open session. Go ahead and ask them. The moderators will respond. And if I need to see something, they will let me know, and we'll spend some time explaining something. So we enter the username and email. Then we also need to enter the password. Once you're entering the password, you might not see it type out. Actually, you won't, but don't worry, it is being typed out. It's just hidden for security reasons. So a user was created when I did that. So I just entered my credentials, and I'm just going to turn on my server again. And we just want to check out the admin panel that Django gives us. So we'll just do Python manage.py, run server. And now when I run my server, we're not going to see that unapplied migrations error. So that error goes away because we officially ran those migrations. So if we go into our URLs here in the root directory, we're going to see this route here. And this is just telling us to go to our domain and then /admin. So this is the first route that Django gives us. And this is an admin panel that Django gives us by default. So it's an interface to interact with our database. So if I just go to that domain on port 8000, if I go to /admin, this is what I get here. So we needed to migrate our database and create our user before we can access it. And at this point, my credentials should be auto-filled in here. So this is what we have here. So if we look at this, we have an interface here. We can see our users. I just created a user. And this is the really cool thing about Django. It makes it really fast, so we're not having to build all this out ourselves right away. We can just start working with it. So if I want to add a new user, let's just say I want to add Praveen here. We'll just enter some kind of password for him. So we'll just go through the defaults here. So I just added a new user to the database. So now I can see Praveen. If I want to update this, I can go ahead and modify it. I can throw in an email here or do whatever I want. So I can basically perform CRUD operations without having to build in my own interface. So we do have a sessions table. There's a couple other tables that were built in by default, but we're only going to see users and groups. Now we're not going to work with groups. This is something that we can use for permissions. We're not going to work with this, but we are going to use users in the future here. So this is the Django admin panel, really cool thing that makes for setting up our application really fast here. So let's go ahead and actually build out our own tables. So these are the tables by default that were created for us. And what I want to do here is start building out our database. And for this, we are going to use something called models. So I'm going to go into my project here and I'll move this down here. So all of our models are going to be built within our app here. So our app was called projects, and this is going to be built within models.py. So what this file is basically it's going to be a file full of Python classes that inherit from the model object here that Django gives us. And this is basically going to make classes that represent database tables. So let me give you an example. So I do have a couple of pictures for this. So this is all in the video and in the source code here. So this is what a model is going to look like. So let's say we want to create a database table for a project here. So in this case, the project would have something like a title, a description, and an ID. So we're going to build this out. We're going to inherit from models.model. That's going to make it officially a Django model. Then when we make our migrations, which is what we did a couple of seconds ago or a couple of minutes ago here, this is going to build out a table in our database. So if we look at this, the name of the class here is going to be our database table. The table will be called project. Each attribute will be a column in that table here. So we see ID, title, description, and so on. Now, each entry of this table here will be, or each instance of this model here will be a new row in the database. So as we create them. So I hope that makes sense. We're basically creating a class-based representation of a table. So the table or the class is the table. The attributes are the columns here. So this is what we're going to build out. So let's start building this out right now. So I'll close this out here. We'll go back into our file here. So let's go ahead and start building out our project table here. So in here, the first thing I want to do here is create a class here, and this is going to be called project. And usually when I'm creating classes, I'm going to capitalize every first letter of the word. So in this case, P is going to be capitalized. And right now we just have a Python class. So to make this a model, we're going to inherit from models.model, and model is going to be with the capital M. So now we have a Django model. So to actually start creating the tables here, what we're going to do is start creating our attributes here. So we'll just do title here, and we need to specify the type of field that we're working with. So the first one for the title, this is going to be a simple string here. So we're just going to do models.char field, and this is going to be like a character field, and this just means that it's going to be a smaller text field. We are also going to have a text field later on, which is going to give us more options, and that's going to be for like a description. So in this character field, the first thing I want to do is I want to show you a couple attributes. The required attribute here, or parameter, is going to be max length. And this is telling us that we need to specify how long this field can be. So at this point, I don't think a title should be more than 200 characters. So we'll set it at that. And that's all we need to do. So we'll move down here, and the next attribute we want to add is going to be a description. So we'll just do description, and this is going to be from models.text field. So a text field, I want somebody to be able to write a long description. We're not going to set a minimum here, so we're going to leave it like that. And that's the second attribute. Now for the text field, I do want somebody to have the ability to create a project and not have to actually write out their description yet. Maybe they just wanted to make the entry and then they wanted to write the description later. So in this case, we are going to set the null value to true here. So that just means that this item can be added into the database and it can be empty. So the title here has to have a value in the database. Description can be left as an empty value. So if we try to save this to the database and null is by default set to false here, so that means that we cannot leave it as false here, or we cannot leave it blank. The database will not let us save this. Now, the second parameter we could add is going to be blank, and this is for Django to know, and this is basically going to tell Django that if we submit a form, make sure that we can also have this blank. So null is for the database, blank is for Django to know that this can be blank here. So null and blank. So let's go to the next value here. So let's see. Okay, so I see Praveen chatting. I thought he had a question for me. If you guys have a question, speak up. I might not see them. So Praveen and Abhi will let me know. Okay, so the next value here, we are going to have an owner to a project. So I'll just add that right now. So we'll do owner. But because we don't have an owner table yet, we're going to leave that. So we're just going to comment that out like that. We also want a featured image. So we'll just do featured and then underscore image. For this, we are also going to need to set up a different field. We're going to have to run an install for another library. So until we complete that, I'm going to comment that out too. So we're going to leave the featured image. We do want a demo link. So this is going to be to a live link if you want to show off your project. So if we go to our example, if I go to any project here, looks like I got another message. So we're seeing that working right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to a project. So if we go to any project, I don't have a live link here. I'm trying to find a project that does have one. So here we go. We have a live demo. We're going to have source code and other links provided with that. So these are the fields that I'm adding. So we have a demo link. In this case, I'm going to leave that as a character field. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. We do want a source code link. So I'm going to copy all of this. And for the link, if for some reason your link is really long, I'll just set that to like 1,000 characters, allow more there. So we'll copy and paste that here. And then we're going to change this one to source link here. So that's going to be like to the source code. A project will have a vote later on. So we want to have a vote total. So this will be a hard coded value. So vote total, and this is going to be an integer field. So we're just going to do models.integer field. So that just means it's going to be a number. And we can also set the default value. So default here is going to be 0. So when we first create a project, it's not going to have any votes. So we're going to leave that as 0. So I hope all this is making sense so far. We're just creating some attributes to our table or columns. So after vote total, we also want a vote ratio, and this is also going to be an integer field. So the vote ratio will be the ratio between your vote total and the type of votes. So for example, if you have 2 votes, 1 upvote and 1 downvote, your vote ratio will be 50%. So this is going to be a percentage. So in this case, we'll just do vote ratio. Default is going to be 0. So if nobody's voted, we should just leave that as 0. So after vote ratio, we're going to add in 2 more fields. So we're going to add in a created field. So this is just going to be a timestamp of when this model was instantiated. So when you create a project, we want to know when it was added to the database. So we're just going to make a timestamp. So this is going to be models.date time field. And for this, we're just going to do auto underscore now underscore add. So we're just going to set this to true. And that just means anytime someone creates a project, go ahead and take a timestamp. So a user cannot manually modify this field. It's not going to show up as a field we can edit. It's just going to be there for the user. So after created, by default, Django will actually create an ID for you. And this ID field is going to be just called ID, and it's just going to be a number. So when we add an item to the database, it's going to start at 1, and then it's just going to auto increment. So I don't like that because that can be an issue if we're just having IDs as numbers. It could be a security risk if somebody can just go to random IDs. So what I want to use is something called a UUID field. So this is going to be a 16 character field here, and it's going to be a random list or a random string of numbers and letters, and it's really hard to actually, decode it. Not decode it, but it's hard to just guess somebody's ID. And also when we migrate a database, let's say that we have 2 databases and we just want to merge them, there's less likely a chance of a conflict there. For example, I built out a project one time and I had to migrate 2 databases and merge them. And I actually had the number values for the ID fields. And what happened was that all the values that had a number that were the same as what was in the other database, they were conflicting. But when I switch this to UUID fields, it's very unlikely that there will be another ID with the same values. So I hope that makes sense. So we're just making sure that it's safer and that there's no conflicts. So for this, we're just going to do models.uuid field. And for this, we need to set the default and where we're getting this. So the default here, we need to import UUID. So we're just going to do, thank you, Praveen, for fixing that. So we're just going to do import, and this is going to be UUID. And default here is going to be UUID.UUID4. So we're just using the, I believe it's the, not the base 64 algorithm. I'm actually not exactly sure what the 4 means. I think that was something with how many characters it's going to output. Praveen and Abhi, if you remember that one, go ahead and correct me there. Completely blanked out here. So
it have 1 or 2 and 3, 4 versions. So in 4 version we have much likely to conflict. The version 4 will generate more unique IDs.
I see. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Yeah, that's how I remember it too.
Like the strength of the string is larger than the previous one.
I see. Okay, yeah. So it's the length of the string. I think that's 16 characters at this point.
Yeah.
So we also have to make sure that this field is unique. So at this point, Django still doesn't know that this is our ID. It doesn't know that we're overwriting it. So we're going to set this as unique, set to true. So that means that no other project can have the same ID. So we have to make that unique. And then we also have to tell Django that this is the primary key. So primary key, this is going to be set to true. So we're telling Django this is now our primary key or ID, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of like the same thing here. And we also want to make sure that a user cannot edit this. So we're going to say editable, and that's going to be set to false. So that is our ID. So I saved it. So I actually have an extension where it's called Prettier in VS Code. So download that if you want to use that. And anytime I save it, it's going to like format my code. So you saw that jump back there. That's because of Prettier. So we have a project here. What's up?
To interrupt you. I was just wondering if you could like really quickly explain the difference between unique and primary key, because isn't primary key meant to be where like every row is unique? So could you just explain why we're explicitly saying unique is true and what's the difference?
So in theory, so here's how it goes. So a primary key just means that this is now our ID. This is what the database is going to view as the ID of this model. Unique can be set to any field. In theory, we could put this to the title here. Or let's say we use like a slug field and you were going to use that in your URLs. You can set that to unique, and that will ensure that no other field will have that same value. So unique does not have to be, it's not specific to our ID. It can be used anywhere. So I can actually say demo link here, and I can add that here. So it's not specific to the ID, whereas primary key just means that this is the primary key itself. I don't think we can set this field without using the unique value, or I actually feel like we can, but we just want to ensure that there's no conflict. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but primary key is set for specifically the primary key, whereas unique can be used on any field here.
There is another example, like if you are creating a custom user model and you have an ID as a primary key, and you also want to set email address not to be same, so you can set that unique is equal to true in the email field.
Yeah, exactly. So that way you ensure that no 2 users use the same ID, even though it's not the primary key. Okay, so So that's our model for now. That's all we have. We're going to make these tables later. This is when we set up our relationships and so on. So the last thing is I'll actually just make a migration and we'll set up the string value in a second here. So once we add a model to the database, Django still doesn't know what we're doing here. It doesn't know about this. So what we need to do is we need to prep our migrations. So if you look into your app, you're going to see this migrations folder. And at this point, you're just seeing this init file here and nothing else. So there are no migrations yet. So if I open up my command prompt here, I'm going to open up a new terminal. We can just do Python manage.py make migrations. And this is going to create a file for us that's basically going to prep all the commands like these SQL commands to execute to actually add this to the database. So this command will not work if you did not configure your project in settings.py. So make sure this is configured. So basically when we make our migration and then finally migrate it, Django is going to look in here, find any apps that have new migrations and then migrate those. So Python manage.py make migrations. I'm going to hit enter. So what this is doing is it just told us that it created a file 001 underscore initial.py. So this is what we have in that file here. So if I look into migrations, we just added this file. So if I look into this migration file, we're seeing migration and it's telling us what it's going to do. So it's going to create these fields in our database. So it's basically prepping our database to actually build this out. So it hasn't made it and it's not in our database. So if I go up here, so the second command, once we prep our migration, is to execute that migration. So I'm just going to do Python manage.py migrate. So we ran migrate earlier. So this is going to go ahead and execute that and build our database table. So I'm going to hit enter. So there we go. It looks like it executed it. It took those migrations. So it took all this and it added that to the database. Now to actually see that, because we don't have direct access to our database, we need to register this model with the admin panel to actually see it. So if I look in the admin panel, let's open this up here. So if I refresh it, we're not seeing that table here. We can't do anything with it. So the admin panel is it's a luxury, or it's something that's not exactly what we need. We don't actually need it. We just use it because it's convenient. So you don't actually have to, in theory, register things with the admin panel, but it's a good thing to do that if you want to access your data right away. So we're going to go into our app here, into the projects app, and we're going into admin.py. So this is where we register models with the admin panel. So we're just going to do from, what's up?
Sorry to interrupt you. There's a question that came in a little earlier that I think is appropriate. I thought you should answer this. So someone asked, related to images, whether it's better to save the URL of images and host images on AWS, or save them as a blob in a DB in like posters or MySQL. Just wanted to hear your take.
So yeah, so I like to host them on AWS or on what was that? Linode. I forgot their name. So instead of just doing a URL, you could in theory set up a URL and just link them, but I feel like you'd have to do that manually, so it's not the best way to do it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use something called an image field, which is going to handle uploads into AWS or Linode or any other static file hosting provider that you have. It's going to upload images there, and then you can access the URL attribute. So we're still accessing URLs that are in I guess a third-party location. So it's always good to host images in one of those platforms, but if you created like let's say you just did a char field here, you would have to load up an image on AWS or find a different way to upload it and then manually set that link. And that would be unnecessary, where we just use the image field here for this, which will automatically upload it once we configure it, and then we just access the URL attribute for this. So I hope that answers the question. Let's see if there's a follow-up here. So is it better to save the URL images and host images on AWS? Yeah, so I think it's way better to host them. I personally don't see why you'd put them in the database. Just host them somewhere else, and then in the database, you'll save the URL will actually be saved. So that value will be accessible. So the file will have a URL attribute. So, okay, so back to the admin panel. So we need to register this project with the admin panel. So in admin.py, we're just going to go ahead and first import our models. So models sit in the same file structure. So we're just going to do from models, and we're going to do import project. So that's the first model that we're importing. Once we have it, we can do admin.site.register. And we're just going to tell it what model we're going to register. So we're going to register the project model. So I'm going to save this. And now if I go to my admin panel, if I refresh that, there we go. We now have a project model in the admin panel. So I can actually go here. I can add a project. We'll just say our first project. And this will be added as a row to the database. So here's actually the difference between null and blank. I want to show you something here. So at this point, if I try to save this, I just made a mistake here. I should have left these fields right here as null and blank set to true. So what's happening here is I can't save this because it's telling me that these fields are required. So this is happening because, I'm actually glad this happened because it's a perfect example. This is happening because right now in our demo link, we just created a field, but we need to set these two values. So I need to go ahead and say null is set to true. So in the database, if somebody doesn't have a link, they should still be able to save this item. And we should also set blank to true. So I'm just going to copy these right here, and we're just going to paste those into source code, into, well, vote ratio by default, that's already 0, so we can leave that, source code and demo link. So there we go. And I think I do have to run another migration. Let me try this really quick. So if I refresh it, so yeah, actually no, it's going to let me do it without it. Maybe the blank value won't let me save it, so let's try that. So we'll just do project 1. We'll leave all this blank. If I save that, there we go. So not null constraint failed for project demo. So that means that the database still requires that field. So we updated the blank value, which told Django now this field can be submitted, but the database still doesn't know that blank is set to true. So I just have to rerun those migrations. Anytime we make a change, we need to rerun migrations. So I need to do python manage.py, make migrations. We prep that. So if we look into migrations now, we have a 002, so a second migration, and it's telling us all we're doing is modifying a few fields here. So it tells us what we're going to prep, and now we need to migrate it. So python manage.py migrate. So we execute that. Now the database has been updated. My server is still on here. So if I refresh this, I should be able to save it. So we'll just do our first project. Okay, so if you look at this, these fields are bolded, the required fields, and the ones that are not required are, I guess, not bolded. So vote ratio and total, those have a default value, so that's why we don't have to enter anything there. So if I save this, there we go, we have a project in the database. So I can open this up, I can edit it, and we can start modifying it here. So I want to fix one little thing here. I don't like this value for the project. So this is a Python class, so we can create a string representation of this project. So to do this, we can go back to our model here, and we can create a method here. So there's a string method by default. So that's going to be a method here, _str, _, and this takes in self here. So we're accessing the class here. So that's self, and we can just do return. And for this value, we'll just do self.title. So the title is what I want to see by default if we don't access an attribute. So this value has to be a string. So if you did something like vote total, let's say you wanted to find every project with a vote total, you would have to make that a string here. So if you're doing something like this, make sure you wrap it. But if you're using a string value, you could just do self dot and then the attribute name. So self is accessing the instance of this project. So if I save this, because it's a model, I didn't update the actual database table, or because it's an attribute or a method, I don't have to run migrations again because I didn't update any attributes here. So if I refresh that, now we see our first project. So if I add another project, we'll just do second, save it, and there we go. We're seeing these, and we're seeing the string representation. So I can use any one of these values here. I can use a description and so on. So we just created our first database table. We migrated it. We set up our project model, and that's it for this section in the video. So let's go ahead and go to the next section. So we just created our database, and now we want to move on to, let's see, where was that? We want to move on to database relationships. So any questions on what we just did here? So you can ask a question in the chat. You can request to speak. I can answer those. I just want to make sure everything made sense. Let me know if you're stuck anywhere or you just needed something clarified. Okay, so
Yeah, you can unmute yourself and ask.
here, let me just bring this in here. So because this is going to be recorded and posted later, I want to make sure that everyone can see what the questions were. Okay, so no problems. So far, so good. Cool. All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to keep going. If you still have a question, go ahead and ask it, and then one of the moderators will bring that up to me. All right. So let's move on to database relationships. So I need to pull up that next section. So I have my notes here. Give me 1 minute. So I'm going to pull up the relationships. And I do have a couple of pictures for this. So if I bring this down here, the first image I want to pull up is going to be this one here. So we are going to focus on 3 types of relationships to start with. Now, there are many database relationships. We're going to focus on the 3 most common ones. So this is basically how our database knows about different tables. So our databases, or our database tables, they need to be connected in one way or another. So imagine that we, actually 1 second, I have a question here. So let me try to get to this. So those Python file that make migrations create, are they important to keep? No, you don't need to keep them. So good question, actually. So these migrations, I wouldn't recommend deleting them unless you absolutely need to, but these migrations here just execute the actual code here. So in theory, you can actually get rid of these without breaking your code. They just help execute what's going on here. So the last migration will always be executed, and there will be a note of that. Yeah, you can revert migrations. I'm pretty sure Praveen and Abhi let me know about that. I've done it at one point, but it's a whole nother topic. But if you need to like move back, you could in theory refresh a migration. So you can undo them and then remigrate a database. But yeah, so this is what the question was regarding these files here. They in theory do not need to be kept after a migration is executed. I would recommend keeping the most modern one. Don't delete them unless you find a reason to do so. But yeah, they're something there to keep note. Okay, so back to relationships. So imagine we have a question.
No, I just want to add something. Like if you want to change your like revert your migration, there is a simple hack. Like you can delete all of your migration except the init file, and you can make changes to the model, and then run the make migration command with the app name. That will create a fresh migration file, and it will also reflect the changes in the database.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a way that I've seen it. I've seen a few different options, but if you delete all of them and then leave the last one, yeah, update your models and then run the most recent one. So clarifying the difference between null and blank. It's always a good question because a lot of people get stuck here. So let me reiterate this. So null is for the actual database. So the database rows, basically it's saying that when you enter an item into the database or an instance of a project, the database row or column cannot be empty. So that's for the database. So that means that if you try to manually, let's say you were using something like Postgres and you try to go into the database and you try to manually hard code a value, if this value is set to null, that means the database will not accept an entry if this value is not there. Blank is for Django forms. So when we submit this, so if we go to the admin panel, Django is basically saying that it will not allow a submission if blank is set to false. So by default, it's false. So blank is not for the database, it's for Django. So in theory, null could be set to true and blank could be set to false, which means that the database will allow an entry if there is no value, but Django will stop you even before that and it will not allow it. So if you're setting null and blank, you're usually going to set them both as the same value. I can probably imagine a few instances of where you might maybe alternate those, where one may be true and one may be false, but this is for Django when you submit a form, and this is for the database. So I hope that clarifies it. Okay, so
I have one more doubt.
Sure.
Yeah, like whenever we use date field, date time, and time field, we have 2 options. Like auto now add is equal to true or false, and we also have auto now without add. Now a lot of beginners stuck there and they don't see any difference like while using them. But do you know what is the difference between Django auto now add and auto now just simple?
Yeah. So let me pull this up here. I want to actually just do research in front of you here, but I believe the difference is auto now will save an instance or a snapshot on each save, I believe. Auto now add is going to be only when the instance is created. So when you create the object, it's going to take a snapshot and that's it. But when you save it later on, it's not going to recreate a snapshot. It's just going to keep it where it was. I believe auto now, I'm trying to remember which one it was. This will take a snapshot every time it's saved. So let me see. Let me pull that up from the database here. Automatically set this field every time the object is saved. Yes. So let's say right now, when I save this project, we took a snapshot, right? When I save it again, it's not going to retake a snapshot. It's just going to leave it where it was. That's it. So on the first save, that's it, only on creation. But if I set it to auto now, every single time I save it, it's going to take a snapshot. So this is good if, let's say we created like a chat application and we had a thread, right? So you would save the creation of a message, but you would want to know every single time that thread was updated. So let's say you ran the save method on the thread and it would know exactly when the last chat came in or when the last time that thread was modified. So auto now add is on creation, auto add is on every single save. It takes a new snapshot.
So we can use two fields like created and updated with different options like auto
Yes.
now add and one with auto now.
Yeah, exactly. So what you could do here actually is you can say something like timestamp, and this would just be models.datetime field. And then you can just say auto now add, and you can even just say updated like this. So now every single time this project was updated, we took a timestamp and we know when the last time it was modified. Hope that answers the question. Really good question, by the way. I love that. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to move on from this section because I do want to get to relationships now. Love the questions that came in. Let's go ahead and open up this picture. So back to relationships, a user is going to have projects. Let's say you are on Twitter. When you make a post, a tweet has to have a connection to a user, right? Like Twitter needs to know who made this post. Twitter also needs to know who liked this post, how many likes were in this post, all this information. So these are database tables. This is how things are connected. So what I'm going to do here is actually pull up the database diagram for this project. So I'm using drawsql.app. It's something that I like to use to draw databases. And let's pull up these relationships here. So if I open this up here, I almost forgot about this, by the way. So here you're seeing these relationships. Anywhere you're seeing a line, you're seeing a different type of relationship. So you're seeing a user to profile. A profile is going to have a project. A profile will have a skill. So that's a user with a specific skill. And you're seeing the relationship type. So if I click on this, this is a many-to-one relationship. If I go to this one right here between a user and a profile, this is a one-to-one relationship. So there's different types here. So let's talk about what we have here. So let's pull up this picture again. So the first type of relationship I'm going to point up or pull up here is going to be a one-to-one relationship. This just means that this relationship is only between two models and that's it. So in our case, we have a user model. That's what Django gives us by default. And we are going to have a profile model. The reason why we're going to have a profile model is because that's one way of adding or extending a model. For example, the user model has its default values, but what if I want to add things like bios, descriptions on a user, social links, and so on? I could modify the user model, or I could just add all this information to the profile model. So this is what Django gives us by default. It's not all the fields, but Django will give us a username, email, first name, last name, is staff, is active, and then a few others. But I want things like a headline for a user, a bio, location, and all these other attributes. So all I did was create a new model here, and we create a one-to-one relationship between a profile and a user. So this means a user can only have one profile, and a profile can only have one user. So it's a one-to-one relationship. They cannot connect to any other instances. Once they're connected, that's it. They can only be related between each other. Now we could modify that relationship, but they can only have one instance of the other object. So if that one doesn't make sense, it will in a minute here, or when we get to that part. A one-to-many relationship. This is going to be your most common relationship that you're going to see in any database. Now, one-to-many is pretty self-explanatory. We'll see a couple examples of this. One-to-many just means that one instance of a model or a table can be related to multiple instances of another table. So examples here would be profile can have many projects. So if Praveen made a project, Praveen should be able to add multiple projects. So that means that Praveen can have multiple projects, but this project can only have one owner. So a one-to-many. So it's like a parent-child relationship. So if I pull up this example, let's go ahead and actually pull up that picture. This is a one-to-many relationship. So in this case, let's say we have reviews for a project. One project can have multiple reviews. So in the database, it would look like this. We have a project table. We see the project ID. Let me just make this bigger. So the project ID is 1. We have some information about it. And then in the reviews table, when we add a review, we're going to have the ID of the review. In this case, we have 3 and 4. And anytime we want to connect that review to a project, we just add the parent ID. So that is how the relationship is set through an ID. So we look at this ID right here, it's 1. So this tells us that this instance right here, 3 and 4, are connected to this project right here. So that's how it's created in a database. It simply just holds the parent ID value. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have questions there, but it's one of the most commonly used relationships. Now the next one here, this one is pretty easy to understand once you see it in practice, but it could be a bit confusing. This is many to many. This just means that one instance of a table can be connected to multiple instances of another table and vice versa. So let me pull up an example because this picture might not make sense. Basically, there's no hard-coded value between the two. So I'll close this out now, and we're going to pull up a many to many relationship. So that's one to many, we'll go to many. So many to many. So imagine that we have a tag. So let's say for your account here, if we pull this up, let's just actually look up this example. So if we go here, if we go to one of my projects here, so I'm going to go to projects, we'll go into this laboratory management system. I did not add any tags here, so let's see, maybe we see some here. Okay, so here we go, we see this one right here. So we see these tags here. So this user should not have to recreate another tag called Django or JavaScript. They should just be able to use the same tags. So that means that this tag is not tied specifically to this project, and nor is this project tied to this tag here. So in the database, let's pull that back up here. This is what it would look like. So this tag can be attached to this project. This one can be attached to this project and this project here. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that this project is limited only to this tag. It can also be connected to this one. So if I'm confusing anyone, let me know. I want to clarify this, but I want to start showing you how this is made in the database. So how this would look here is we're going to have a project table. So we have a table here. We see the ID, project description, and we have a tag table. Now to actually create this relationship, we're going to have something called an intermediary table. So I'm going to zoom out so we can see this. So this intermediary table is not something that we have to create manually. Django will actually automatically migrate this once we create that relationship. So what this table does is it holds the instance between the two tables here, or the relationship. So when we create a project and once we attach a project to a tag, in this table, we're going to see an instance here that's going to take the project ID, which is 1 here. And if we add the tag of 2 to this project, or the tag with the ID of 2, it's going to save that entry right there. So this table right here is what defines that relationship. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask here. But that's something that you might just have to see played out in practice. But I feel like those are the best examples I can bring up at this point. So that's the introduction to our relationship. So let's go ahead and actually create some. So for our project here, we have one database table here. I want to start creating another table here. So we're going to have to run some more migrations, and we're going to start modifying this a bit. So I want to create a review model and create a one-to-one relationship. So let's go ahead and create a new model down here underneath our project. And we're just going to create a new class, and this is going to be called review. So review is going to inherit from models.model. Then we are going into here, and the first attribute we want to set is going to be the owner. But we don't have an owner yet, so I'm just going to comment that out here. So we have not connected this to a user yet. The next one is going to be a project. So we do have a project. Now to set this relationship, all we need to do is add in the instance of this model here. So to do this, we're going to use something called foreign key, and that's what sets a one-to-many relationship with Django. So we're just going to do models.foreign key, and all we do is specify the model that we want to connect to. So we're just going to do project, and there we go. That sets our relationship. Now we do need to add a few more things here. So we need to do on_delete. So on delete, we want to know what happens to the instance of this review when a project is deleted. So let's say we have a project that has 5 reviews. What happens to those 5 reviews when the project is deleted? Do we want to keep them? Do we want to delete them? Basically, what happens to all the children here? So in this case, we have a few options. We could do models.set, and this will be set like that, _null. So this means if the parent is deleted, all the child objects in this attribute, this will just be set to null, so the review will stay there, but it's just not going to have a parent anymore. What I like to do in this case is I want to delete all the parent or all the children here. So we're just going to do models.cascade. So this is going to delete all the reviews if the project is deleted. So all the children of this project will be removed when that's deleted. Now, just to be safe in production, I like to just set null and blank to true if I'm testing something out. Just so I don't get any errors, we're going to set these values to true. So let me save that, and we'll just go over this again. We set the project, we set the one-to-many relationship. So we have the project name or the model name, the on-delete value, and then null and blank were set to true. So that's our review to start here. So we also want a body. So if somebody wants to actually write a review, and if we have a question, go ahead and speak up. I heard a mic there. So we'll set body here. This is going to be models.text field. So this is going to be the actual review, so the contents of the review. So for this, in theory, I'm going to allow a review without a actual body here because we want to also just allow people to vote. So we want them to up and down vote without actually leaving any review here. So I'm just going to leave that as blank and null set to true. And we are going to have a value. So for the value here, this is going to be a char field. So we're going to do models.char field. So this is going to be the value of the vote. So is this an up or down vote here? So for this char field, I want this to be a drop-down list for a user to simply select what they voted, select their vote here. So the first thing is I do need a max length, and I'm going to set that to, we'll just do 100. We can actually set that to like 50 because it's just going to say up and down. So I could make it exact, but I'll leave that as 50. And at this point, we're just going to see an input field. So what I want to do is create a drop-down menu here. So we're just going to do vote_type here. And this is not an attribute. This is going to be something that we can access here. So we're going to create a tuple here. And in here, we're just going to say up, and then the actual value will just be up here. So I'm just going to leave them as a string representation. And I'm going to copy and paste that and say down. So this is the vote. Is it an up or down vote? So we'll say down here. So I can take this vote type now and I can add that in here. So I can just say choices and I can say vote type. So this means that when a user is submitting this form, they're only going to have these two options as a drop-down list. So they can only select those two and they can't just input their own value. Now for the last two, that's it for our review. So I'm just going to take this ID and created value. We're going to take that right here and we're going to paste that in right here. And let's actually do this. Let's just say updated. If we, for some reason, want to allow users to update their vote, let's just do updated and we'll do models.date time field. I figured now that that question was asked, we could actually show this an example. And we're just going to do auto_now, and we're going to set that to true. So that's going to take a timestamp anytime this review was updated. So later on, if we want to allow the user to change it, we'll have record of that. So what I want to do now is just set the string representation of it. So let's just do this. We'll just set that method. We'll do _str. So the string value will pass in self here. And we're just going to do return. And in this case, let's just do self.value. So we'll set that value and that's it. So we could change this up later, but for now, that's all we're going to have. So if I migrate this, I'm going to migrate it before we add in the next model and relationship because we are going to add in a many-to-many relationship in a second here. So let's go ahead and save this. Actually, are we? Let me double check that. I can't remember if we decided to add that or not. Yeah, so we're going to add the many-to-many relationship in a minute. So let's actually do this. In here, we'll just add in a tags field, and we're going to comment this out. So this is how we're going to set that many-to-many field. So we'll do that once we add the tags. So let's go ahead and open up the terminal. Let's run our migration. So we have to prep the migrations, Python manage.py, make migrations. And then we can do Python manage.py migrate. So we're going to execute that. And let's take a look at what we have. So I need to register this with the admin panel. So we'll go into our app. In admin.py, we're going to import review. And we're just going to do admin.site.register. And we will just register review with the admin panel. So we always need to register if we want to see that in the admin panel. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have here. So if I refresh that, now we see our reviews. So let's review this first project here. So if I want to review it, let's just manually do this from the admin panel. I can add a review. I can say cool project here. That's going to be our review. I want to upvote it. So this is that drop down list. So that's how we were able to add in the choices. And I can add in what project I want to review this to. So now that is the one-to-many relationship. This review can only have one project. So I get one option here. So I'm going to add this to the first project. And I'm going to save it. Now, what if we wanted to delete the project here? So remember, we set cascade, or on delete, we set cascade here. So if we go into models here, we said on delete, go ahead and delete this child here. So the review. So if I go to this project here, we'll go into project, we'll go to the first project. If I delete this, confirm it. If I go to reviews, this review is no longer going to exist. So it just deleted that. That's what that took care of for us. So we'll just add in one more review. We'll go into second. We'll just say cool work. And we're going to leave this review for now. So that's the one-to-many relationship. We now have our review model. Any questions on that relationship, let me know. We're about to move on to the tag here. So for the tag, we are going to move on to that many-to-many relationship now. So let's check the chat here. So I see Praveen answered one question. Praveen, if you feel like the question would be good for everyone to see, bring it forward so I can actually refer to these. So the question is, so are there two choices, Sentinel, Cascade, or are there more options? I thought there were more options. Let me confirm that. So I'm going to Google this up with you guys. We're just going to do Django on delete, and then we're just going to do options. I swear there were more options, but I can't remember the exact confirmation. Let's see. Praveen actually answered that. He said, yes, there are more, do nothing. Yeah, so that almost seems like null. So there are more options. I thought there were more too. So if anything, I would just recommend looking up the documentation, and they should explain that for you. Okay, so no problem so far. Good question. I've only used Sentinel and Cascade. That pretty much takes care of it for me because I either want it to be removed or I just want it to be left alone, which is kind of what do nothing seems like. I'll have to look up the difference between that. So let's go on to our tag models. So the many-to-many relationship. So we are going to create that intermediary table that I showed you in the diagram. So let me move this chat here. I see one more question coming up, Praveen, if it's good. Or if we have a good question, bring it forward. It looks like they just said all good. Okay, so we have the review. Let's go ahead and start creating the tag now. So for this tag, we're just going to create a new model. So this is going to be underneath our review. So let's go ahead and do class tag. This is going to inherit from models.model. And we are simply going to need a name value for the tag. So the name will be like Django, React, JavaScript, or any other tag that you want to add to a project. So the name value, and then we're just going to do models.char field. And then we'll do max length. So this one requires a max length. And let's see, at this point, we don't want it to be blank. So we are just going to leave it like that. So you need to add a name in order to have a tag. Now, I am going to take created and the ID. So I want to make sure I have a UUID field. And I want to get that timestamp. So we'll just copy and paste that. And let's create that string value. So we'll just do a string, double underscore, pass in self. And for the return value, we'll just do self.name. Add it in a / there. Okay, so for the tag here, before I run this migration, what I want to do here to create the relationship between this and the project, we're not going to set a relationship like we did with foreign key. So this tag can in theory be added also to a review. It can be added to a user, whatever we want it to do. It's not bound to any specific model. So to set that many-to-many relationship, what we do here is we go to the model that wants to hold that relationship. And in here, we're just going to do tags. So we're going to add an attribute called tags to our project. So we're going to have to remigrate it once we do that. And in here, we're just going to do models.many. So many to many field like that. So M is capitalized, T is capitalized, M and F. So every first letter is capitalized. So we set the many to many field, and then we need to tell it what model to actually connect to. So in this case, we're going to say tag. So we want to create a many to many relationship to a tag. Now there's going to be one issue here because the tag is below. I believe this is going to give us an issue. So in theory, if we wanted it to work like this, I would paste in the tag above it. So that way we can connect to it. But I want to leave my tag down here in the model just as a preference. So we're going to leave it down here. And in order to not get that error, so you see that we're referencing this variable or that class before it's been created, we're just going to set that to a string. So that's just going to delay it, and it can still make that relationship. So you don't have to create it as a string if the tag model is above the project model. But because it's below, I'm just going to add a string. Now in here, all we're going to do here is just set blank to true. So that just means that we don't have to select this in the project form. When we're submitting that, we want blank to be true. So we don't want to have to select a tag. So we created that relationship to that tag model. So on migration, that intermediary table that I was talking about, this one right here, this will be created by default. And later on, when we create a Postgres database, you can actually see what that looks like. Well, I guess it's going to look exactly like this on the database, but once we look at the schema, we can actually see that. So that's what it's going to auto generate for us. And then we'll actually add and create some actual relationships with those tags. So I want to show you how they actually work in the admin panel. So let's go ahead and run a migration again. We made some updates. We added a model and we modified another model. So we'll do python manage.py, make migrations. So we're going to prep that. We see that we created a tag model and we added a field to project. So we want to migrate these, python manage.py, migrate. And there we go. So we applied the migration. So to actually make this work, we need to go into the admin panel. We need to import tag here. So we want to register this model, admin.site.register, and we're going to throw in tag. So let's see what this looks like. So let's add a few tags here. So if I refresh this, now we see tags. So we're just going to go ahead and add in Django. Let's add in JavaScript. So we just want to make some entries here. We'll just do React. Let's add in HTML. We'll actually edit that one. And let's just do CSS. So these are all different tags that we can work with. So this is that many-to-many relationship connection here. So I see a question. I'm going to answer that in a second. So if we go to project, if we go to this project here, so second project. So I'm going to open this up here. In here, we are going to see tags. So later on, this will be like a checkbox field or whatever we want it to be. It doesn't really matter how we set this up. But now we have an option to select multiple tags. So in this description, it tells us to hit Control and then click on what we want. So if I hit save, so I'm going to save and continue editing, we just added these tags to this project. Now here's the thing. I added Django, React, and CSS. But what if I had another project here? So we're just going to do project 3. And what if I wanted to also use Django and CSS? I can do that. There is no official connection between these two. That connection is not fully bound to each other. So we can actually set multiple projects to use those tags. Now, if I go to the tag, we don't see any parent relationship. It doesn't really care who it's connected to. Only the parent needs to know about that. So let me know if we have any questions here. So I want to jump into the questions or into the chat here and pretty much get ready for the next section. So we're actually done with this section. So we just completed our relationship. So let's see where we're at. So question, is the tag class the junction for many-to-many relationships for the models? Sorry, I don't fully understand that question. Praveen and Abhi, if you get the question, can you rephrase that? If you guys understand that, jump in here. I'll move on to the next one and I'll try to get back to that. So if you can just re-clarify that. So if I set a two-way relationship between tag and project so that there are many-to-many field in project with a tag and other many-to-many field on a tag with a project, will that be allowed? So what the question here is, let me rephrase that. So why would you connect a tag to a project? Are you saying like a parent-child relationship? I also don't fully get that question. So any simple demo on atomic transaction implementation in Django. Okay. Okay, so let me know if you guys fully get the question. Sorry, I'm not fully getting the context of these. So let's just move on to the next section and I'll at least get that prepped. And as the questions come in, I'll try to re-answer those. So the question is, I have another question and it says, can you please explain why you wrote tags on top? So I think you're asking about this situation here where I pasted tags up here. The reason why I did that originally and I actually removed it was because it's kind of like setting a variable. We couldn't use tag here until we actually had the class. So because we wanted to use it here and we weren't using the string value, we needed that option here because Django would look at this and say, hey, I don't know what a tag is because we haven't created it yet because it's all the way down here. So we're referencing it before it was even created. So that's why some people would put it above there, but because I put it in a string, that connection still works. I think that was a question. Yeah, exactly. So basically it would say, I don't know what tag is. You would get some kind of error that says Django doesn't understand what the heck tag is because we wrote that later down in our code. So like I said, it's the equivalent of calling a variable before you actually instantiated it. So let's move on to the next section. So we are in the final part of this entire section here. So let me pull this up here. Okay, so database queries. So now we want to start working with our database. So we set it up here. We want to actually start calling some data and then eventually rendering it out here. So we want to render this out in our templates. So this is where things start getting a little bit more fun, is when we can actually use that data. So let me pull up the notes for this next section. So I have a couple of pictures for this. I think I actually lost a few of them. So let me go to the GitHub repo and let me just pull up the repo for this project here. So that was Django 2021 here, and I'm just going to access the pictures from here. So that's in the resources folder. You can all access these. So let's see, we have images. I think I may have thrown all those in here. I may not have. What's up?
There is one more question, like related name option in the related name option in the foreign key or in the many-to-many field.
Yeah, so that's one way to do that. So the question is, why don't you use related name? Won't that make that easier? No, it's just another option. So what the question is referring to here is what we could do. I think you're referring to the relationship between review and a project. So we can set something here where in the parent, I believe it was right here. Correct me if I'm wrong, Praveen. Yeah, so it'd be right here. So we could just say reviews like that. We can give it any name. So later on, when we want to access all of the project's reviews, we could just access it by going into project.reviews and use the related name. So we could use that. I don't want to use it right now because I actually want to show you how to work with a default model manager, and then we can customize that later. So I want to actually show you how to use that set method, the underscore set method that we're going to use in a minute here. Okay, so let's go ahead and move these out. I can't find the picture that I'm looking for, so let me just go over one picture that I have here. I'm missing the other one. I must have deleted it. I'll find it and upload it. So drag this in here. Okay. So query sets. So this is how we interact with our database. So there's different ORMs that we can, most applications will have something called an ORM, which basically allows you to talk to your database. Django actually has their own ORM. They actually build it in, I believe. So they have their own way of actually querying data from the database. So we're not having to run like SQL commands to actually get this data. So we don't have to deal with that. This manager or the ORM here basically allows us to call our database using things the Django way. So let's take a look at this. So if we look at some examples here, I'm going to go down this list here. We see a simple query set. So in this case, to get all the tables from our database, and we're going to be doing this in our views in the actual course here. I do this from the terminal and then I go into the views here. In this example, if we want to get all the tables from a model or from a database, we would specify the model name. So in this case, we would just do projects. And then we can go into .objects. So that's the model manager. And then we can just do .all. And this will just give us all the project objects from the database. Now, if we want to get a specific object from the database, we could just do the model name, .objects, .get, and then specify the attribute. So I won't go through all of these in this video here. This is all in the course. You can reference this. I'm going to make sure it's in that resources folder. I must have forgot to upload that, but we can also use the filter method. So we can do .filter, and then we can filter by a single attribute, which will give us every single model or object that has a specific attribute with the value. We could do something like starts with, in this case, if we had a project called Django and then another project called Django 2021, it would basically allow us to return back any object that starts with the first character. So let's say we enter DJ into the search field, then we can get back any project that starts with that value. We have contains. This just means as long as it contains the characters in that search field, it will return those values. iContains is the same thing. It just means that it's going to be case insensitive. So it doesn't matter if it's lowercase or uppercase. It's just going to return back any value regardless of that. Now, greater than or equals to, these are for numbers here. We're just making sure we can pull back, let's say, any project rated above a certain value or below, and so on. So we can also run something like the filter here, where this will give us every object that contains a value here. The exclude method will exclude any value that contains what we put into that search or into this string here. So it's kind of like filter, but it just reverses that. We can also order our query sets by using the order by method. There's different ways of doing this. Let's see. Looks like this one is repeated. For some reason, that looks like it's a repeated value. So the last two I want to run over here. Or actually, there's a few more here. So we can create an object. We can do the model name. So in this case, project.objects.create, and then specify all the attributes. This will actually create an instance in the database. We can modify a value by first getting the item. Whoops, I zoomed out here. So we can always just get an item from the database by its value. We can update the attribute, and then we can call the .save method. We can also delete an item, so we can query that item and then hit .delete. This needs to have parentheses right here, so that would delete an item. And this is what I was talking about in that set method. So we have the related name option where we can just specify that and then get all the children of a specific table. But this is the way I'm going to use it, and then we can switch to the related name method. So I want to show you an example of that. So if I miss it, remind me of that. So in this case, let's say we got the parent object. So let's say we got the project here. We put that in a variable called item. So we got the first object from the database. And then let's say we wanted to query all of the reviews to this object. So the review would be the child model. In this case, you would just go into item, so project, whatever you call the variable, dot, and then child object name, and it would be lowercase. So in this case, if this was review would have a lowercase r. Don't worry if this doesn't make sense. We're going to see an example in a second. So we go into the child object name as an all lowercase, and we would also use the underscore set dot all method. So underscore set right here, this is the key. We specify the child model name, and then when we do underscore set, it's basically saying give us a set of all the children of this model. In this case, we're getting all of them. So that might be confusing. If it is, don't worry, I'm gonna show you an example right now. Now, I also wanna show you the many-to-many field. If we wanted to get all the related objects here, we could just do our objects. So in this case, the project here, once we queried it, and we could just do dot tags in this case. So in our models here, we specified tags here. So we could just do project dot tags and then dot all, and that will give us all the relationship values. So that's all I'm going to do here. I didn't want to spend too much time in this section. I go over this in the course a little bit more in detail, and I query one by one here. But let's go ahead and just start using this, and hopefully that'll make more sense. So this is a little cheat sheet that you can use here. So I'm going to close this out here, and let's go into the database queries. So the first thing I want to do is get some projects from our database and render them out in our templates here. So we're going into projects here. So we have our models. We are going into views now. And inside of projects, the first thing I want to do is I'm actually just going to get rid of all of this right here. I want to get all the projects from the database. So I just need to import our models. They sit in the same file right here. So we can do from dot models, and we're just going to import project. Whoops, what did I click there? Okay, so from models, import projects or project. So we import the project object here or model. And now what I can do, instead of using this right here, we are just going in, we're going to go ahead and set a variable called project list here. And we are, let's see, I'll just call this projects actually. So now to actually get that data, we're going into the model name. So just like I showed you in that cheat sheet, we can go into .objects and we want to get all the projects. Later on, we will add a filter, but for now, we just want to get all the projects from our database. At this point, we have 2 projects. So that's all we have at this point. Let's just add in another. So we'll just do e-commerce website. So I want to actually have some real names here. So we'll just leave it like that. We'll add another. We'll just do portfolio. We'll just do portfolio like that. Okay, so 4 projects in our database. So to get all of those, we just queried those. We just queried all of these and we put them into this variable. So I just want to print this out really quick. We're not going to render them out just yet. So we're just going to do projects here. And let's just print out what we have here. So if I save this, if I open up my terminal, I need to go to this page. So I need to go into the home page, so the projects page, and we're going to see that print out right here. So we'll go in here. We're going into the home page. I'm going to minimize this. So every single time I call this page, that view gets triggered, and we're going to see project function here. So let's see, something's wrong here. It should return back a query says. So, oh, I did project like that. Okay, so I need to add in an S here. So if I refresh that, so every time I call this view now we're going to see this query set, and we see all the projects in the database. So those are just all the objects that we have. So that's how we get it. We just go into the model name objects.all. Let's remove this, and let's actually pass this into our template. So I'm just going to replace project list with projects now. So if I save that, I should see the real projects from our database be rendered out here. So if I refresh this, there we go. Looks like our title or description isn't prepped yet. So we see the ID, that's the UUID value. We see second project, e-commerce website, portfolio, and I could just output the description here. So let me actually add that to the database. I think I'm rendering that, but because I didn't add a description, we won't see it. So let's just say we'll go into the admin panel, and we'll go into a project, and we'll just say a new description. We'll save that. And now if I refresh it, there we go, we see that description. So it looks pretty bad right now, but we are querying the database. We'll fix up what this looks like. But now we have all the projects here. So we're actually querying real data from our database. So let's go ahead and do the same for a single project here. So in this case, I want to get rid of all of this. So we'll remove that. And to get a single project, we're just going to get a variable called project here. So we'll just do project obj for project object. And this is going to be project.objects.get. So I want to get a single project. So what I'm going to do is go into the ID value. So now we can reference a single project from the database. Now remember, the ID was passed into the URL here. So that's going to be passed in as PK. So that's the primary key. If I save that, the database will go get this project here, and we're going to render that out here. So let's just take this variable and let's paste that in right here. So I see Pravino's already trying to fix that. So we query the project, we get back a single object now as opposed to a full query set, and that's it. So let's go ahead and go to a particular project now. So I need to add in a link here so we can actually link up to this. So let's do that. So now we can go into our template, we'll go into projects here, and let's just remove this ID. I feel like the ID looks pretty ugly at this point, so I'll remove that. We'll take out that value, and let's just add in a link around the title here. So we'll add in an A tag. We'll take this closing link here, bring that over here, and we want to link it by its ID. So we'll just do href, and then remember we can use that URL tag here. So I think we already did this. If I forgot to talk about this, let me know, but I feel like we already worked with URLs here. So we'll just do project and then project.id. So I think that's what the URL was called. So it looks like we never actually gave it a name. So did I miss this, by the way? Can anybody let me know if I missed this in the last section? Because I feel like I didn't talk about this. So it looks like the dynamic URLs, I feel like I completely missed this. So I don't feel like anybody will understand what this means right here. So the URL tag. So it looks like I did miss it. So let me recap it. So basically with our URLs here, you can actually give a URL a name. So in theory, let's actually do this. So I'll go back here. We could do something like this. So we can do /project / and then we can pass in the project ID. So pass in the variable like that, project.id. So that will give us a link to the project. So we'll take care of that URL tag in a second. So I'm going to save this. We'll go ahead and refresh that. And now we have a link. So when I click on this, it's going to pass in that project ID. And now we see the project here. So if I go into eCarma's website, we see the description. So we're able to pull it up, and that's how we can link up to projects. And now we're getting real projects from the database. Now, I forgot this in the last section. So let's talk about URL naming and URL tags here. So this is all in the course, but I forgot to do this during the stream. You can actually name a URL here. So in this case, we're just going to name this URL projects, and this one is going to be project, so a single project. Now what this does is it allows us to name a URL so we can reference a URL by its name rather than the actual path. And there's a lot of power to this, and it makes this makes our project a little bit more dynamic, or our application here. So let me show you what happens. So we could manually set that path like this. But what happens if I change this to let's just say we do single-project. So if I change this, I'm going to have to go into all of these URLs here, and I'm going to have to modify this into single project. Now at this point, it's just one value, doesn't really make a difference. But if we had this referenced in a lot of parts of our application, this would cause an issue. So if I save this, we renamed it to single project here. If I go into my template, if I refresh that and I go into this link, now this link doesn't work because I didn't update that. But if we go into the URL and reference it by its name, we can actually use the URL tag here. So in this case, we would do the curly braces, %. This is a tag here, and we can just do URL, and then we specify the name of the URL, and then outside of the quotes here, so I use double quotes. So that means out here we'll use single quotes. We can just add in project.id. So look at this, now the URL looks different. So what's happening here is it's going to reference our URL by its name and then actually output an actual value for that. So if I look into this, if I do inspect here, we see the URL being generated here. So right now, if I click on it, it's going to work just fine. We see single project or a single dash project and then the ID. But what if I change my mind here and I don't want to have this as single project, I want it to be project. So if I save this, this right here won't throw any issues because we're referencing the name. It's just going to change the URL value. So if I refresh this, it's still going to work. So now if I look at it, if I inspect here, it just changed the value to project just because we referenced it by its name. So I completely forgot about that in the last section, but now we can actually modify that and things are going to look a little bit better. So it just makes it to where we're not having to update everything when we change a URL value here. So I told you I was going to show you one more query set. So now what if we want to actually output a project's tags here? So let's go into our e-commerce project. Because we have a description, I'm going to add in a better description. So I'm just going to look up lorem ipsum here. Let's take this. Let's just say this is the entire description to this project. So where was that? So we'll change the description and let's just add in these tags here. So we're going to select these. We'll save that. So only the e-commerce website will have that long description and those tags. So what if I want to output all these tags inside of the project page? So I want to know what project or what tags this project has. So just like in our example where we see the tags here, well, we can do this in multiple ways. So I could go into a project here and I can actually say this. I can do tags here. And just like I mentioned earlier where we can specify the parent name. So I can do project object or project obj here dot tag. So dot tags dot all. So this is how we reference it. So we're going into this right here. So we're going into tags here and we're going into this attribute and we're just going into the tags like that. So I can save that and I can pass these into the template here. So let's actually make a context dictionary. So we'll just do context because I'm adding more values. I want to be able to actually just pass in the variable here. So I'm going to copy and paste that. So we'll just do context. And let's just pass in the projects here. So I need to add a comma. So we just got all the tags like that. So context, what am I doing wrong here? Oh, I forgot the equal symbol. I see Praveen's trying to help me, but all right, I'll let you fix that, Praveen. So just go ahead and fix that. So we see the context right there. We need to add in a T. We'll throw that in. Okay, so we get all the tags and now we can render all the tags out on this page. So I can go into a single project here and let's just add in a line break. So we'll just do HR and let's just do right here. We'll do for tag in tags. And then we can do end for. Okay, so in here, let's just do a span tag. So we'll just do span and we'll just output the tag itself. So the variable, we'll throw in the tag. And let's just add in some styling inline. This is all going to be removed, but let's just do border 1px solid. And then we'll just make that like a gray or a dark gray here. So we'll just add in that hex right there. And then we'll just do padding. And I'm going to set that to 1 EM here. Okay, so we loop through all the tags and we're just going to output them here. So if I refresh that, now we see all these tags. It looks pretty bad here, but if I go to another project, let's see, second has CSS, React, and Django. If I go to e-commerce, HTML, React, JavaScript, and Django. So we were able to query all of these by simply going into the project.tags. So that's the many-to-many field.all. So what if we wanted to actually get the child objects? So for this, let's go into our admin panel and let's write some reviews here. So I'm going to write a new review, say I like this. And we're just going to do e-commerce website. So that's where we'll add it. We'll do an upvote. And then I'm going to add another review. And this will be a downvote to e-commerce website. And I'll say not too good. So we'll just do a downvote. So now the e-commerce website has two tags or two reviews, an up and a downvote review. So one positive, one negative. Now, because this is a one-to-many relationship, I can actually do this. So I can do project object dot review. So I'm accessing the review model here. And you notice that even though the model name starts with a capital R, when we're accessing a child, we're going to do a lowercase value. So review underscore set dot all. So this is saying, go to this project and get me all the children. Get me the entire set of reviews. So in this case, let's just do reviews like this. Pass that in. And I can just throw those into the context dictionary also. So I'm going to paste those in. And that's how we're able to get the children. So a many to many field and then all the children. So if I go into the single project, let's say I want to add all the reviews after the description. So we'll add in an HR tag and we'll just do for review in reviews. And then we can just do end for. Okay, so in this case, we're just going to output these. So I'll just output some kind of paragraph tag. So we'll just do p tag, and let's just output the review itself. So we'll just do review.body. So that's it. And let's see what we have here. So if I refresh this, we should see all of our reviews now. So if I refresh it, here are the reviews. So let's add in a title here or a headline so we can see it. So we'll just do H3 and we'll just do reviews like that. Okay, so there we go. And I don't remember what project I left a review for. I think that was second. So here we go. We see all the reviews. So now let's try the related name method. So related name, what we could do is we can actually go to a model here and we can go into the reviews and we're going to tell the project how to access this. So instead of using that underscore set method, we can actually do related name. And I'm just going to say access this by reviews. So that's the related name that I'm going to give it. So now that I set this related name to the project here, or to the project attribute, I can actually go in here and instead of saying review underscore set dot all, and I believe this will still work. So let me try to actually save this. Okay, so it doesn't work right now because we changed that related name. So what I could do is actually just do project.reviews. So this will only work because of that related name. So if I do this, now I can access this. Okay, so I'm having an error. Praveen Abi, let me know what I'm doing wrong here. I think I have to do .all, but let me know. So we'll just do .all like that. Okay, here, I'll fix it, Praveen. Trying to do too much here. So reviews.all. So now we're able to access it because of that related name, and I think that'll fix it. Okay, so there we go. So we see the reviews, and that's what the related name value did for us. So what I'm going to do here is actually remove this because I want to keep it basic here. So I'm going to remove that, but at least you see that in the tutorial. You know how to modify that. So we'll just do reviews. I'm going to remove it now here because we can't use this, and I'll do review underscore set dot all. I feel like people need to learn this method before they fully understand the related value or the related name one. So last thing I want to do here is I want to show you that you can actually access this from the template. So let's do this. Let's comment all this out. Let's remove this from the context dictionary. And instead of having to query that here and then render that out, I can actually go into the template here and I can do for tag in project.tags.all like that. And I don't put the parentheses there. So in the template, we don't do that. And that will access all the tags. So I'm going into project.tag. So we can access that here. Now I could also go into reviews here. So we'll do for review in project.review underscore set dot all like that. And that should work. So I just wanted to show you the difference. We could access it like that. So if I refresh that, everything is still working. So that's it. We just completed, let's see, let me close all these out. We'll close out this diagram. So we just completed building our database. So we set up the model, set up the admin panel. We talked about relationships and we talked about database queries. So at this point, I just want to see if anybody has questions. Let's elaborate on anything. I hope that made sense. We always have the tutorial or the actual course to reference, but let's see what anybody or what everybody has to say. All right, reviews.body. Okay, good question. So we can access an object by its values here. So this is an object just like you would a dictionary too. This is an attribute. So a review has an attribute in the class here. So we can access any one of these using the dot notation. So let's say I also wanted to access the actual vote here. So because our string value actually returns back the value itself, we could just leave it blank like this and that will return it. But I can access each attribute by just doing review.value. I can also do the date created. So I can access this. So we can do review.created and that will give us all those values. So let's take a look at this. And there we go. So we can access basically attributes of a object by using the dot notation. So I hope that makes sense. And by the way, if you want to jump into the chat, I guess we could open up the chat for everyone. The voice chat, it still might get a little bit messy, but let's just try it. I would love to actually interact with you guys instead of just having Praveen and Abhi bring it forward. Let's just do this. Let's end it right now. If we have questions after, we can get into those in the group. So anybody that's not part of this course, you can absolutely join us. This is for people that bought the course. We have a Discord server called Django Bootcamp. For anybody that's watching this on YouTube, it'd be awesome to have you here. Any paid members get to join here. And we have teacher's assistants where we are able to help each other out. We do these sessions privately. And I'm just making sure that anybody that takes this course can complete this course with assistance also. I just want to make sure that nobody gets stuck. In the past, people will get stuck on a certain section and they won't complete a course. So that's what we're here for. We're here to elaborate and expand upon things. So good session, everyone. I'm glad you all enjoyed this. And thanks for being here. We'll see you guys. I'll make an announcement maybe next week. I might do one this weekend. If you have suggestions on dates and times, I can change that up. But we could crank out the next session soon. So I just want to get the API videos up there, make sure everyone has those, and then we'll move on. So recommend some dates and times in the general voice chat maybe, and I'll look through those and see what everyone wants to do here. So we'll see you guys in the next session.